now, Florida Congressman Jared Moskowitz, the state's former director of emergency management. And Congressman, thank you for being here tonight. I mean, you know what it's like to be in this position. What is the biggest challenge for these response teams in the aftermath of a storm like what we just saw hit Florida?
Well, thanks, Kaitlan. Thanks for having me. Well, right now, the biggest challenge is search and rescue. Obviously, the surge has been and continues to be the greatest challenge and the greatest potential loss of life. It is the water. It is not the wind. And so time is of the essence where, water rushed into homes very quickly within a matter of hours, 8 feet in some areas, making sure that they can go home to make sure that people who need to be rescued by those swift water rescue teams, that's the greatest challenge. And then obviously rushing in those resources that are life, health, and safety. So, drinkable water, ice, food, making sure people get medical supplies. Sometimes they set up, portable hospitals. They set up, portable, prescription centers so people can get their medicine. So that's what, Director Kevin Guthrie right now is dealing with. All those pre-positioned assets that he moved in anticipation of the storm, those days of preparation are now coming into full view.
Yeah, I mean, we're just kind of getting the full view of the damage and what that's going to look like, how long that'll take. I mean, based on what you've seen and what you've heard, how long do you think that recovery could take?
Well, look, Category 5 storms take a decade, right? Sometimes they take a little longer. I mean, the Panhandle's still recovering after Hurricane Michael. And so, look, this was a Category 4 storm, right? It hit, just on the cusp. It was a very strong Category 3 storm when it made landfall. That eye wall came through these areas that have not been hit by a hurricane in over 100 years. And in those areas, a lot of them are fiscally constrained. They don't necessarily have the resources. And so there are some communities that may never look the same and others that will get rebuilt that will look slightly different. And so, look, this is a life-changing event for some of these counties, some of these fiscally constrained counties. But look, all of those resources from the state, all of those resources from FEMA that are going to come in, the FEMA reimbursement, the HUD money that comes in for housing, all that CDBG DR money that's going to come, that will help the community recover.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a big part of this. And you've worked with Governor DeSantis in previous disasters in your previous role, including obviously hurricanes that hit Florida pretty regularly. What do you make of the job that he's done so far?
The governor's doing a good job on emergency management, and he has since he came into office. He really understood that emergency management in Florida needed to be the top agency in the country. In fact, on the very first day that I took over in 2019, the very first place we went to was Mexico Beach. And quite frankly, the government in Florida, including the governor, has poured hundreds of millions of dollars into building the greatest emergency management agency of any state in the state of Florida. And they're battle tested, right? They just did Ian a year ago. And so, the state of Florida is on top of emergency management. We have to be when you have storms like Michael, Ian, and now Idalia all in a 4-year period. But look, the state's doing a good job. We've had a couple loss of life, but that's been kept down to a minimal. I think a lot of lessons learned from Ian. A lot of people listened and heeded those evacuation warnings. But look, we're not out of the woods yet. The immediate response is still ongoing before they eventually transition to recovery.
Yeah, and of course, one person who has visited there frequently because of that is the FEMA administrator, Deanne Criswell. She's coming to Florida today. She says that FEMA has about $3.4 billion left in its disaster relief fund. Maybe it sounds like a lot of money, but it's not when you think of what they need to do in Florida, what's happening in Maui, other disaster areas in the U.S. And the White House is asking Congress for $12 billion more for that disaster relief fund. But some Republicans have complained that it's tied to new Ukraine funding as well. Do you think that could imperil the passage of that money that they need for that disaster relief fund?
No, that's a great question. I mean, first of all, I have the bill. I have the bill to refund the DRF, which is FEMA's fund, for $12 billion in the House. I filed that bill. Senator Rubio filed it in the Senate. So it's a bipartisan, bicameral bill. Neither of our bills are moving. And so, yes, the Biden administration coupled that together with Ukraine, which I support the Biden package, but I also support moving these pieces of legislation individually if necessary. The FEMA administrator said these communities, both in Maui and in Florida, are going to have the money that they need for the response. But one of the things that we know is that hurricane season is just beginning. We got all of September, we got all of October, and reimbursement for the state and these towns will be slowed down And that's not something emergency management should be focused on. They shouldn't have to worry, that their money is not coming on time. That's not what they should be focused on. They should be focused on response and recovery and rebuilding. And so Congress needs to do its job, right? Emergency managers out there are saving lives. They're preparing for their communities, right? Every single solitary day, away from their families, away from their kids. People are losing their houses. They're losing loved ones. Congress needs to do its job, and they need to fund the one agency that helps people in their time of need when we face disasters in this country, and that's FEMA.
I mean, it sounds like you're worried that it might not get passed.
Well, Kaitlan, listen, we've on a 6-week break right now. We're coming back for 3 weeks in September. We're only going to work 2 weeks in October. We're only going to work 2 weeks in November. Congress hasn't passed a lot of pieces of legislation this year, right? You got the Freedom Caucus holding up bills going to the floor by voting against the rule. So yeah, I'm worried about that dysfunction. Now, with that said, right, disaster management has shown that it's bipartisan, it's nonpartisan. You've seen people like Governor DeSantis and Joe Biden work together, not just in Surfside and in Ian. So I'm hoping that sentiment comes to Washington and we can pass this on a bipartisan basis.
So, I mean, what if it doesn't get done? I mean, who should voters hold accountable if that funding doesn't get passed and FEMA's forced to kind of re-strategize and move pots of money around?
Well, they got to hold the legislature accountable. I mean, we are the legislative branch. We are the appropriators, right? And so they got to hold us accountable. If those bills do not move in the House and the Senate, they got to hold leadership of both houses of the Senate and the House accountable.
Something President Biden said today when he was speaking on this in Maui, he said, quote, "I don't think anybody can deny the impact of the climate crisis now, but some Republicans who are running for his job are doing just that." I mean, how do you deal with a crisis if lawmakers and the White House can't even find consensus on it?
Well, look, not every disaster, right, is necessarily because of the climate crisis. But I can tell you the hurricanes that are affecting Florida are. This went from a tropical storm to a Category 4 storm in 24 hours. It's called rapid intensification. It's the same thing that happened in Hurricane Michael. That's supposed to be the exception. It's now becoming the rule. Why? The Gulf of Mexico is basically a hot tub, right? It's 98 degrees. We had a buoy measured 98 degrees off of the state of Florida, and that's what's leading to this rapid intensification. So that is where climate change is affecting the strength of these storms. Watching the Republican debate when they asked, is climate change real? Yes or no? It wasn't a trick question. People looked around like to see what the answer was from the teacher. I mean, it was ridiculous, right? Climate change is real. Climate change is affecting these storms, and it's affecting things happening in areas that haven't happened before. Tornado Alley is expanding. We're seeing flooding in different areas, fires, right? And hurricanes that are much stronger. And so, listen, we got to be honest, which is that climate change is going to not only affect us globally, but it is going to make these natural disasters much stronger than we're used to seeing in the past.
I mean, it wasn't just that they looked around at that question. Vivek Ramaswamy said that, I believe his quote was, "The climate change agenda is a hoax."
Yeah, no, he did say that, right? Why not just blame the deep state or say it was woke? I mean, it was a weak example of what it's like to be a troll running for Congress and running for the presidency and trying to tell people what they think they want to hear because, I'm going to get to the right of everybody, right? I'm going to get to the right of everybody. I'm going to say climate change is a hoax. I mean, what a joke. That's not leadership. That's placating to the lowest common denominator, right? In the state of Florida during the Rick Scott administration, they didn't even say the word climate change. They would come hearing after hearing after hearing, and they wouldn't even say the word climate change, right? It's totally ridiculous, especially here in the state of Florida. And so, look, we got to obviously work on a bipartisan level to address this. Climate change is not just going to affect Democrats. It's not just going to affect the libs, right? This is something that's going to affect us all together, and we got to figure out how we're going to work together to solve it.
Congressman Jared Moskowitz, a lot going on in your home state tonight. Thank you for taking the time to join me.
Thank you.